At all prepared for was the way in which the whole experience enlarged itself in my mind after I got home.
As regards Michael's interest, my interest in Chekhov, our sense of that came about in an interesting way. Since I'd told him that I recognized him, having seen him act, he asked me what I was doing. And I told him that chiefly my work is in poetry. And since Chekhov was very much in my mind, I said that I had a poem on Chekhov, and would he be interested in looking at it? So I showed him a poem called Chekhov and Niece, which he was kind enough to say he liked. Along the Boulevard des Anglais, tourists mistook him for Lautrec, though he was taller, and when not hunched over hacking, his walk was straight enough. Perhaps it was the way he stared at women, like a beggar at a banquet window, and then he was always scrabbling for a notebook, while the snickering revelers flowed like water around a stone. Oh, they all knew him artist. All that is, except the people he would talk to in his scant, atrocious French. The waiter, the cab driver.
I used to stay in Nice at the Pension Russe and live the life of a king. The only thing wrong with the Pension Russe was the other Russians. Devil take them all. I found myself sitting next to one of them at dinner one night. "Excuse me," he said, "perhaps I am unpleasant to you." "Why would that be?" I replied. "Well, because of my profession. You see, excuse me, but I'm a spy. You see, I couldn't pass my examinations at school, but my mother has a friend who's a general. Now, my mother's a very respectable woman, by the way. She has a pension, and my father was given a military funeral. Well, this general says to my mother, 'Would you like me to find a job for your boy in the Secret Service?' And excuse me, but he did find me a job. Only because I'm not very strong, they sent me abroad to a warm climate as if I was on government business. So, excuse me, here I am." "But look here," I said, "could you denounce me to the authorities?" "Oh, good gracious me, the idea. I've read your books. In our service, we respect famous men. We even put inscriptions on the houses. So-and-so died here. Excuse me, the idea. But look here, what made you choose this sort of work? Isn't it rather rotten work? Excuse me, it's fine work. It's even described in novels. Everyone's afraid of us, but we're not afraid of anyone. Yes, but sometimes you might get a thrashing. Well, certainly that is painful and unpleasant. But in the first place, there's no need to get caught. And then we are taught gymnastics for use in an emergency. Now, we have a fellow in our service, a big, dark, hairy fellow. He really knows his gymnastics. He once slipped free from 5 assailants. He's even shaken hands with the head of the department. But I don't approve of him. Excuse me, but sometimes he uses torture. Now, that's not gentlemanly. And is he a spy as well? Excuse me, yes. But soon he'll be a cabinet minister.
I mentioned that one of the reasons for my great admiration of Chekhov, apart from always having loved his extraordinary plays, was that he made an astonishing voyage to Sakhalin. It was a very crucial decision, and it came at a very important moment in his life. That is, he abandoned everything in Moscow, his theater contacts, his busy life as a doctor there. And he set out to Sakhalin so as to look into the lives of the convicts there. And he did an astonishing amount of work there, recording conditions and so on. And this warmed me to the writer even more than his plays would have done on their own. And Michael evidently didn't know too much about this, and he became very much interested.
Since I arrived on Sakhalin, I've worked for 3 months, from 5 in the morning until late at night. And I still feel like a man at the zoo who's seen the insects and missed the elephant. I visited every hut and made a card index of 10,000 convicts for my survey. I've talked to men chained to wheelbarrows. I've learned things that everybody should know on pain of 40 lashes. I have enough for 4 doctoral dissertations and a feeling in my innards as if I'd been eating rancid butter. I developed headaches. There's something wrong with my eyes. I was so struck by Lucien's poem and also what he subsequently told me about Chekhov's trip across Siberia to Sakhalin, the same journey as we were making, but in reverse and under obviously very much more difficult circumstances, that I realized that the received image that I had of Chekhov, out of really only a few brushes with him, was very incomplete indeed.
Always been affected very strongly by Russian literature. And it was just a marvelous thing to roll slowly through the country of Dostoevsky and Tolstoy and of course Chekhov. And the associations that came as we moved through. Michael, I'm sure, felt the same way.
Go along in a sort of wicker basket drawn by a pair of horses. I sit in this vehicle and look down on God's earth like a baby, without a thought in my head. Heaven only knows where the Siberian plain ends. Brown earth, the bare branches of the birch trees covered with hoarfrost like powdered sugar, lakes all covered with ice, a cold wind pricking my cheeks, wild ducks taking wing from my carriage wheels and flying lazily off into the birch trees. Never in my life have I seen such a multitude of ducks. The carriage jolts over the hillocks, turning my innards inside out. But I'm used to it now, and no longer notice how morning turns to noon and noon to night. My socks blow their noses. The inside of my felt boots feel like a water closet. All that keeps me going is some incomprehensible, daring ardor.
The extent to which Chekhov enters the bloodstream means I suppose it is impossible to write without taking on such values as you perceive in Chekhov, in particular that eye for the small detail which actually illuminates a much bigger picture. I suppose in a way that's Chekhov, in that he was always able to draw from the specific and the detailed something important and general.
Writers like Dostoevsky think we should be solving great questions, like God and pessimism. But we have specialists who deal in specialized subjects like that. For the most part, people have dinner. That's all they do. They have dinner. Yet during this time, their happiness is established or their lives are falling apart. I mean, why would I write about a man who climbs into a submarine and goes off to the North Pole in order to secure a reconciliation with the world, while at the same moment his beloved hurls herself with a shriek from the belfry? No. Who should write about simple things? Pyotr Semyonich married Maria Ivana. That's all. And of course, I learned the values of simplicity very early. For the Moscow magazines, the rules were 5 kopecks a line, maximum 100 lines, and if you went over, back would come your answer. Dear sir, you don't bloom with fear. Your latest story is long and colorless like the white paper ribbon a Chinaman pulls out of his mouth. We shan't print. You're fading. Very sad. To hell with them. I think of those editors now. It's as if I was swallowing a woodlouse. But I did learn to write about anything, straight off. And I can't remember a single story I spent more than a day on. No writers nowadays complain they've no subjects. It's absolute nonsense. Everything's a subject. You dig 'em up by the spadeful. For instance, you might see a monk going from place to place, begging a bell for his monastery. You feel an excellent subject coming. There's something tragic about that black monk against the pale background of the dawn. Or you look at this wall, for instance. Well, now, at first sight, it seems to hold absolutely no interest at all, does it? But if you look really closely, you'll see something that nobody else has noticed, and then a really good story can come out of it. And I do believe a good story should be brief and to the point, and reading it should be like swallowing a glass of vodka. Alphonse Daudet once asked a bird, "Why are your songs so short?" And the bird answered, "Because I have so many songs, I'd like to sing them all." Well, as you write, a subject has to seep through your memory like a filter and leave behind only what is important and typical. For instance, imagine a man in a field of rye on a sunny day. Dostoevsky would write, a tall, narrow-chested man who had a short red beard sat down on the green grass, already trampled by passers-by, sat down noiselessly, timidly, fearfully glancing about him. I'd write, the man sat on the grass.
I had seen some one-man productions. I like them very much, but it struck me as something that an actor who was as creative as I sense Michael was, something an actor would like very much to do, create something of his own with the work, the life of a man he revered. And it was clear to me that Michael revered Chekhov. So I made the suggestion. He hemmed and hawed and said, "Well, you know, that's not a bad thought."
I have a memory of driving with my grandfather to Rostov-on-Don when I was still a schoolboy. It was a blazingly hot day, I remember, quite exhausting. Our eyes were gummed together, and our mouths were dry with the heat and the wind blowing up the dust. We didn't feel like talking or looking or thinking. We stopped at a place called Bakhchisalach to feed the horse at the house of a rich Armenian my grandfather knew. I can remember sitting on a green chest in the corner of the room, exhausted and covered with dust. The wooden walls were unpainted, and the furniture and the yellow floorboards reeked of wood baked by the sun. Everywhere I looked were flies, flies. Grandfather and the Armenian were discussing sheep, and I knew it would be another hour before the samovar went on, and then another hour for tea, and then Grandfather would have to sleep off his tea for 2 or 3 hours after that. So a quarter of my day would be spent waiting. And after that, there'd be more heat, more dust, more jolting on the roads. I began to hate the steppe, the sun, and the flies. Just then, I heard hurried footsteps, and a girl of about 16 came into the room, wearing a simple cotton dress and a white shawl. As she rinsed the crockery and poured the tea, she had her back to me, and all I could see was that she was slender and barefooted, and that her small heels were covered with long trousers. the Armenian was offering me tea. As I sat down, I glanced up at the girl who was handing me my glass. And all at once, it was as if a fresh breeze had run across my soul and swept away the day's impressions in all their dustiness and dreariness. I saw the bewitching features of the loveliest face I've ever seen. She was a beautiful girl, and I could see it at a glance, like lightning. Sometimes, you know, clouds huddle in disorder on the horizon, and the sun behind them paints the sky with every imaginable shade. Crimson, orange, gold, violet, pink. One cloud becomes like a monk, another like a fish, another a Turk in his turban. The sunset gleams on a church cross or the windows of a manor house. It's reflected in the rivers, and it quivers on the trees, and far away a flock of wild ducks flies homewards. All who look at the sunset, the boy out herding his cows, the surveyor on his mill dam, the fine gentleman out for a walk, all gaze at it and find it beautiful. But wherein its beauty lies, no one knows. No one can say. Well, in exactly the same way, I'm ready to swear that that Armenian girl was a real beauty, but I can't prove it to you. I gazed at her. I wanted to say something pleasant, honest, and beautiful to her, something as beautiful as herself. This appreciation of mine was rather strange, because it was not desire, nor joy, nor pleasure that she excited in me, but a kind of painful, pleasant sadness, vague and hazy as a dream. For some reason I felt sorry for myself, sorry for the Armenian and for grandfather, even sorry for the girl herself. I felt as if the four of us had somehow lost something important and necessary in life that we'd never find again. Well, perhaps I simply regretted that she wasn't mine and never would be, that I was a stranger to her. Or perhaps I had the idea that such rare loveliness was an unnecessary accident, and like everything else on earth, not long to last. Who knows? At any rate, my hours of waiting had passed unnoticed. Our driver walked down to the river and began to bathe the horse and harness it, and the wet horse snorted with pleasure and kicked its hooves against the shafts. Grandfather woke up. The Armenian girl opened the creaking gate. We all climbed into the carriage and drove out of the yard in silence, as if we were angry with each other. And when Rostov-on-Don appeared in the distance, 2 or 3 hours later, our driver, who'd been silent throughout the journey, suddenly turned round and said, "She's a fine girl, that Armenian's daughter." And he whipped the horses.
He writes, of course, with such simplicity, but then so does Tolstoy. And he writes with great passion, but then so does Dostoevsky. But Chekhov seems to have a way of speaking to your inner ear, so that his admirers, perhaps more than with most writers, tend to claim him as a sort of personal friend. When I'm asked about my own interest, or obsession, as I've heard it called, with Chekhov or things Russian, I'm reminded of the doctor in The Three Sisters, who, it's well known, has been in love all his life with the mother of the three women and talks constantly about her. But when one of the women asks him whether she had loved him in return, he simply says, "I can't remember now." And I can't remember how all this began, really, but it seems to me somehow that Chekhov has always been with me in some way. And at some point I must have felt that I knew what it would have been like to meet him. And that's really all that I've tried to pass on.
I sense that he might do it one day because he seemed genuinely interested. But I must say that I'm not normally a needler, but from time to time I would write him and needle him a bit about this production he was interested in completing one day. And I certainly can't claim responsibility for Michael's Chekhov, but yes, perhaps I did suggest it to him. And having seen it recently, I'm very, very happy I did.
I've so much enjoyed being with you. I do appreciate the company of intelligent and courteous people. And I care as little whether they have smelly feet as whether women wear curlers in the morning. And I do need people around me. When I'm alone, for some reason I feel afraid.